Okay, welcome everybody. My name's Shane Pickering and I'm the lead on Council's Community-Led Resilience Planning Project. Welcome you all today to this live webinar. Today's webinar is titled A Call for Action, and in this webinar Professor Darryl Low Choi from Griffith University will present the findings of a recent survey which was undertaken to increase the community's engagement with the Community-Led Resilience Planning Project. So just some housekeeping as we progress through Darryl's presentation. I'll ask that you post any questions you may have in the chat function on the top of the screen. Looks like a little chat icon, and you can post questions up there. And what we'll do is when we finish the presentation, we'll come back to those questions and then run through some of those as time allows. So, but before we do, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Mayor Amanda Fenley, who will carry out the acknowledgement of country and welcome you here today.
Thanks, Shane. And it's really lovely to be here this afternoon. And, you know, no matter how many times we do a webinar and how many times we, think that we're getting used to this technology, and what we see before us is no faces. And that's a really difficult challenge for everyone. But I'm sure that you'll agree that today's information will be is really interesting. And of course, is that call to action or an appetite for action in regards to resilience and our community's attitudes towards that. But can I begin by acknowledging country? This land was, and will always be Aboriginal land. And I pay my respects to the elders of the past, the present, and the work that the elders are doing with the future people who will be the knowledge keepers into the next generations. And I also want to acknowledge that all of us are probably coming from all sorts of different tribal group country. And obviously, Darryl coming into us from Queensland today, he's coming in from the Murray country rather than the Koori country. And I'm sure he can tell us where what country he's representing from this afternoon. And just a few opening remarks. I want to thank Darryl and his connection to Shoalhaven. This isn't his first round of the kitchen with Shoalhaven City Council. He's been down here before and worked on other projects with us. So he knows the lay of our land really well, and he knows many of our people quite well. And I thank Darryl and his team for taking the risk and joining on for this, I think, is another groundbreaking piece of work that's being done by Shoalhaven. And I just want to thank all of you as participants for joining in today. I know that our time is valuable, and as we lead up into Christmas and the Christmas craziness hits us, that it's all starting to feel, you know, a little bit busy back in the Shoalhaven. So I really do value the time that you're bringing to this project today as well. And just in a few words, you know, I think that we all felt the disappointment coming out of Glasgow from the leadership in this country, and it really does put those issues squarely back on communities like Shoalhaven to continue to work not just on our resilience, but on our sustainability. And, you know, we love the place for the nature that it has all around us, and we can live in harmony with nature. We just have to work in collaborative ways to make sure that we understand what our role is. So resilience is not just a buzzword. You know, we see it displayed in many places today, but really what it's about is about, you know, all of us doing our bit to not just bounce back to where we were before, but to come back better than where we were before. And there's so many different ways in which we can do that. But I'm going to hand over to Darryl now to, I think that's who I'm handing over to, or maybe back to Shane for another quick introduction as we go through these very important community survey findings. Thank you.
You want me to go?
Thank you, Amanda, for the introduction. We'll just hand over to Professor Darryl Low Choi, who will run us through his presentation. Thank you, Darryl.
Yeah, thanks, Shane, and thank you, Amanda, for those kind words. So this afternoon, we want to present to the attendees the findings of the community survey, which I guess most of you, if not all of you, took part in. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country where each of us are meeting. I'm in Queensland, of course. It's terrible country in the middle of Brisbane. But I'd like to acknowledge the elders past and present and all the traditional owners of land and seascapes, which have been the subject of our research. So the purpose of today, twofold. It's to present the results of the community questionnaire survey that's been recently conducted. And secondly, it's to highlight where the questionnaire survey results fit into the overall planning process for your community-led adaptation and resilience strategy for Shoalhaven, which of course is the bigger picture and the one that we hope to embark upon early next year, COVID permitting. So the survey objectives, we designed this survey to collect data about people's experience with extreme weather events. So you'll hear about that today. We want to understand communities' views on aspects of the SWOT analysis about their region, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats that we've analysed and will continue to analyse about Shoalhaven. We wanted information about people's aspirations for the future of the Shoalhaven. And we wanted information about community stance on the need for a long-term community-led adaptation and resilience strategy for the Shoalhaven. And of course, adaptation relates to climate change, and resilience is how we experience and get exposed to, but more importantly, recover from certain events. We wanted information about people's willingness to be involved in the development of a resilience and adaptation strategy. And importantly in that regard, we want people's thoughts about personal and community efficacy.
Yeah, it will be.
Sorry? Shane, no?
Sorry, Darryl.
Oh, okay. I thought I was getting a message. And in doing this survey, we took the opportunity to collect some basic demographic characteristics of participants and so on. All right, so those of you who attended an earlier presentation, you would know that the way in which this process is working is that we want to collect all the different ideas and proposals that the Shoalhaven community have, both individually and in your groups. And this is the beginning of that process. And what we intend to do with all these individual ideas and proposals from you folk is to pass them in through a planning process where they're all tested. So we will devise a test of the veracity of people's ideas and proposals, pass them through the planning process to come up with this community-led adaptation and resilience strategy. So this, in other words, is a comprehensive and consolidated approach to put all those individual ideas together and work out which ones should form part of the overall community-led adaptation and resilience strategy. And what we say, the byline here, is collective action has greater weight than individual action. So the SWOT analysis questions, these were designed essentially to gain a better understanding of the assets, the strengths, the capabilities of the community, as well as what you think are the risks and challenges in fulfilling your objectives here. So principally, we were seeking to find out what people love and appreciate about life in the Shoalhaven, to find out what you believe some of the issues are that are problematic in the region, or what you would like to see improved. Thirdly, we wanted you to identify external opportunities that could support a better, more resilient Shoalhaven. And these could be economic in nature, demographic, could be dealing with the physical environment, legislative, local and national or international trends. And then lastly, we wanted you to identify external challenges or external barriers external obstacles, to positive progress. And examples here could have been environmental factors, process of urbanisation, legislation, funding sources, international events beyond our control. So a lot of these are beyond our individual local control, but they need to be identified to see how we can get around them should they occur. Now, these initial findings, particularly from the SWOT analysis, we intend to explore in much more detail with the participants of the first workshop. And we'll talk about when we propose to have that first workshop, COVID permitting. And I'll just remind you about the overall process here of how we're using a scenario planning and adaptation planning process to reach the community-led adaptation and resilience strategy for Shoalhaven. So the first workshop is essentially defining the focal question for the process, but that's where we do the SWOT analysis and we start to develop the vision. The second workshop, or the second phase, is to identify certain uncertain drivers of change. And you'll see the colour coding here. Blue is stakeholder tasks, that is the participants from Shoalhaven. The yellow is the work from my team at Griffith. Out of the first two stages, we'll develop scenarios based on those drivers of change. What do you think is driving change now and in the future? Then we'll assemble, with your assistance, some future options for dealing with those drivers of change. That will lead to a next step where we test. This is the test that you saw in that previous diagram, testing individual ideas, testing individual proposals, and we use scenarios to do that. Then we'll develop what we call a roadmap or a storyline to go from the present to the future, to our vision. Then we'll add to this scenario planning process a next step, which is innovative in the approach to dealing with adaptation and resilience planning, and that's a backcasting process where we'll jump to the future, whether that be a future for Shoalhaven in 2030 or 2050, and we'll step back from that to see what policies we should have in place now to reach that vision of 2030, 2050 or whatever. So then we'll review these policies and programs to see what needs to be amended or changed or introduced. And that will give us what we call an adaptation pathway, a pathway from now to the future to deal with where we can, in the best way possible, the likely changes and events that we're likely to encounter. We can't predict the future, of course, but at least we can prepare ourselves for likely events. And out of that, we'll identify what we call Merrill indicators. This is monitoring, evaluation, reporting, implementation and learning to understand the adaptation approach to implementation. Right, so that's the process. These are the 6 workshops where we have face-to-face contact. And as I said, COVID permitting, we Queenslanders will get the green light to come into New South Wales under a constraint-free environment. Carry indications, those barriers will be down by Christmas, and should that occur, we plan to undertake these workshops in the first 6 months of next year, but more about that later. So, challenges going forward. There is an imperative to understand the needs the hopes, aspirations and vulnerabilities and diversity of the Shoalhaven community. And we're starting to get an understanding of that from this survey that we've undertaken, and you'll see that in the results that I'll present soon. And lastly, the other big challenge, which again I'll go into in more detail, is we need to engage with all sectors of the Shoalhaven community, all sectors, and that's going to be a challenge. But again, we need advice and we need input and guidance from you folk as to how we can better achieve that. So that's the end of the introductory part. I hope I've given you a flavour for where the results that I'm about to present to you will fit in to the overall planning process. If you've got any questions, could you put them on the chat and we'll address those at the end, eh? What I'd like to do now is go to the next presentation. Okay, so if Shane and Sharon can just tell me, is that new PowerPoint being shared, please?
It is, Daryl. We can see that.
Good. Okay, thank you. So the title and appetite for action will become bleeding obvious to you when you see these survey findings, because it certainly looks that way to us. So in a nutshell, this community survey stayed open for 2 months and it was closed on Friday the 17th of September, and that's given us sufficient time to extract the results from SurveyMonkey and to analyse those results and put them together for today and into a report. You should be aware that there's a complementary youth survey being undertaken right this minute. It was open in mid-August, and we've left it open to the end of the school year, which will be next week. I think for grade 12s, and a week later for others. So we'll close it off at the end of the school year. There's currently 41 respondents to that youth survey, which is very encouraging. So we're getting to that age group, and don't forget, I mean, when you're talking 2030, 2050, it's the future of these youth that's really important. People like myself, you know, we're done and dusted by 2030, 2050, but it's the youth that are important to pick up on their views, their aspirations, their vision. Overall, for the main survey, we had 390 responses, and that was a mind-blowing number for us. We're extremely pleased there. Around 70% of those 390 had a full completion rate. So not all of the 390 respondents answered all the questions. Of the 390, about 260, 70% completed all. So what I'm about to present to you today is the responses from the 260 people who completed the survey. And that's a really respectable number. The responses were from a diverse age group, but as you might anticipate, the dominant group were aged over 60. So 58% of the respondents were aged over 60. They came from diverse localities across the Shoalhaven, and I'll show you a map of that distribution in the presentation. 60% were females, 40% males. Six respondents preferred not to say what their gender was. So again, that's reasonably balanced, I suppose. It was predominantly non-Indigenous. The respondents, 8 people did identify as Indigenous in the responses. So it's not as if Indigenous voices weren't part of this. It's just that they're low in number. So, about the age group. Well, the largest cohort is the 60 to 69, and then 70 to 84, that 15-year age cohort, another 20%. But you can see the distribution there. You know, it's as we were expecting. What we weren't expecting was no representation from the 18 to 24-year-old. You can see that is missing entirely. We got no responses from that age cohort. Now, you know, I guess in terms of the demographics of Shoalhaven, there is a preponderance of people that are in the older age groups. So, you know, it might reflect the overall demographics, but you know as well as I do, there's still some 18, 24-year-olds living in your community. So we're going to have to find a way to engage with them. The 25 to 34-year-olds, the predominantly young married couples, starting careers, starting families, only 3%. It's an issue that we've encountered previously, particularly in the Shoalhaven, but it's not restricted to the Shoalhaven by any means. So again, we need to put our thinking caps on how to engage with that younger age group, because again, it's their future that we're talking about. So where do they come from? Well, 57 locations, and the map says it all. The size of the circle gives you an indication of the number of responses from those locations. They're quantified there on the left-hand side. But again, it's encouraging that we're not dealing with just coastal communities. We're dealing with inland communities here as well, and they would have a different take on the issues. So, I'm encouraged by that response in terms of the locations of where the respondents came from. Duration of residence in the Shoalhaven. Well, again, this is encouraging because look at that. Just over 50% of respondents had lived in the Shoalhaven community for more than 10 years. So we've got a lot of experience coming in here. If you take the next cohort, people living 4 to 10 years, 30%. So there's 80% straight away of all respondents that, have got some experience of life in the Shoalhaven. So obviously if they participate with us in the workshops, then we can be assured that we're drawing upon their experience. They know what they're talking about. Right, so again, time will tell when we can start to conduct the workshops whether we're tapping into this experience, but I'm sure we will be. Okay, what were people's experience with extreme weather events, and what is their sense of that threat? So we're dealing with a whole range of extreme weather events. It's not just fire, it's flood as well. It's tropical lows and so on. And nearly all participants, 96% in fact, have experienced an extreme weather event, and of those, 93% experienced it within the Shoalhaven. Now, it's extremely important we tap into that experience. It's extremely important that those people participate in the workshops to make the output, the adaptation and resilience strategy, a meaningful document. And of course, the events included, as those photographs indicate, flood, fire, tornado, extreme heat over 43 degrees Celsius, extreme wind, extreme rainfall events. These are all, extreme weather events that the Shoalhaven has experienced and will experience into the future. We don't know when, and we don't know how extreme, but that will happen. And 76% of the respondents felt threatened, personally threatened by these extreme weather events. So there's proof enough that something's got to be done. So there was a question that asked, what impact of these extreme weather events worried you the most? The table on the left is just to give you the data. Can I refer you to the graph on the right? So the major impact that most people felt, nearly 78%, was environmental damage. Nearly 70% impact was to infrastructure, roads, bridges, social infrastructure as well as physical. Nearly 70% again damage to personal things like home and car. Loss of life, 2/3. Social impacts, impacts the livability and the like, just over 50%, and so on. So it gives us a good clue as to where people will want to prioritise. So that sort of data that you're seeing there gives us a clue as to where to prioritise future policies. So factors that people felt influence the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. This is subjective, but it's based on experience and it's based on knowledge. And the word cloud here says it all. So we took all the results and we then present them to you as a word cloud. So what's that cloud telling us? Well, it tells us that the terms climate change and global warming were mentioned 190 times in the responses that you gave us, 74%. And again, it says it all. And I think Amanda summed that up in terms of the COP results, disappointing as they are. But it says, well, it might be disappointing. It looks like it's up to you and I. It looks like it's up to local communities and councils, local authorities to get on and do this. And, there's an appetite to do it, as you'll see. So why don't we do it? Nearly a third said inadequate planning and land use management issues were influencing the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. That was mentioned 82 times. And natural fluctuations in weather patterns, 11%. So again, we've got a fair idea what people think about this whole issue about frequency and severity of extreme weather events. So what did you say about the influence of human activity on extreme weather events? Well, nearly all participants, 98% thereabouts. If you take the totality, not just a great deal and a lot and a moderate amount, add those all together, most participants believe that human activity influences the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. Only about 2.5% said not at all. So there you have it. What do people say was the relationship between perceived level of threat and extreme weather events and human influence on extreme weather events? So look at the set of figures on the right-hand side of the figure. Those who believe that there was some connection. A great deal is just standing out above all the other responses. So again, when we start to cross-correlate a lot of the results from this survey, and we will be doing more as time permits, and we'll get a richer understanding about how the respondents in Shoalhaven feel about issues related to the themes of this project. So then the question was asked about the unique, special, important issues about the Shoalhaven region. And this is where we're doing beginnings of a SWOT analysis. We're trying to find out what do people think are the positives. And again, this word cloud, you know, it starts to just throw it in your face with what people believed were the assets, if you like, the uniqueness of the Shoalhaven. So the strengths. Word clouds don't lie. Weaknesses. These were sort of the biggest obstacles in that sense. The results didn't give us a specific theme. There was a diverse range of responses, and we have to unpack this in greater detail, particularly in the workshops. This is an area that needs open, frank discussion in a face-to-face context. So we couldn't gauge any specific theme out of the results from the survey, but these are some examples. There was a feeling that inadequate physical infrastructure was a weakness. And as you can see there, some of the examples people gave in the small print. So inadequate physical infrastructure was a weakness. Poor emergency preparedness was a weakness identified, but it wasn't by a large proportion. And what we're putting in brackets after it are either examples, or in this case in red, quotes. These are quotes from some of the surveys that people responded to. Land use planning, overdevelopment, and again, a quote from one of the respondents, just to give you a flavour for what people are trying to say to us here. Poor communications with communities. I don't think any of these would be new to you. I mean, you've experienced them all. It's a question of how we deal with them now. That's a longish quote, but it gives you some flavour for what's being said there. And lastly, political denialism and inaction on climate change. You know, and I think we've said all that. So we know what the challenges are. All right, opportunities. That was strengths, opportunities. These are external opportunities that could support a better, more resilient Shoalhaven. People found this a tough question to answer. That's our take on the responses. Again, there was a very diverse range of responses, but there was nevertheless a strong focus on the urgency of the need for policies around climate change, mitigation and adaptation, and environmental protection. That was no surprise to us. So I'm just going to give you a couple of quotes here from people. They're anonymous, of course, but it gives you a flavour for how people are responding to this question about opportunities. It doesn't quite fit, but it's a response to this question nevertheless. So again, you can see how this sort of question needs to be addressed properly in a face-to-face, open forum of a workshop. It can't be done properly by a questionnaire survey. It can't be done properly online. you need an open forum, face-to-face, to discuss this. So that's why it's important we get maximum attendance at these workshops. Threats, that's how it was defined: external factors or obstacles that could prevent Shoalhaven from achieving positive progress and becoming a better place to live and visit. Now, don't forget, these are often outside your control. But again, the responses we got were very diverse, and some examples of what people gave as examples of what they saw as threats. Okay, so when we now look at the vision, because the vision is important in this exercise, as it is in all strategic planning exercises. This is what's going to guide us in our decision making in this planning process. So once we settle on the vision up front, out of the first workshop, that remains. It remains in place. We don't go back and adjust it or touch it, because we need that vision to guide us in decision making. So, does that represent the vision of a future Shoalhaven? Or perhaps that does. It's got green in it. Well, there's another coastal futuristic city. Is that what you folk think Shoalhaven is? Well, no one have a heart attack. You can get up off the floor now, because I can assure you none of those images are reflected in the visions of the participants. So none of those illustrations represent any response we got. So we're not dealing with any of those images. I think at this stage we'd say your vision could be summed up as a place of smiles. We'll test that. But clearly respondents wanted the natural environment protected in a future vision. They wanted enhanced community preparedness to natural disasters. They wanted improved infrastructure and services. They want a vision that promotes and supports a diversified economy. You told us you wanted a vision that fosters better relationships with First Nation people. You also told us you wanted to improve governance, and you wanted to explore ways to enhance communities' input into planning. And you wanted to maintain current population density. So I think you can see we're starting to get a really good set of elements that should find their way into a vision statement for a future Shoalhaven 2030, 2050. We'll decide on what timeline we develop that vision for when we have our first workshop. That's one of the issues to discuss. All right, so there you have it, a place of smiles. And hopefully we can find ways to retrofit all those elements into a vision statement for a future Shoalhaven. So, an appetite for action. How did we get to that? Well, we asked you the question, should Shoalhaven City Council have an adaptation and resilience strategy? It's a simple enough question. What did you tell us? Well, that says it all, does it not? I don't know who the 3.45% were that said no, but I don't think that matters, because overwhelmingly nearly 84% said yes. So I think there's the authority from the community to go ahead. So now we had a question, try to tease out what you thought were individual and communal sense of efficacy in doing this. So nearly 40% believed that as an individual, they could influence the development of the strategy. Nearly 40% thought as an individual they could do that. But more importantly, nearly 2/3 believe that as a community they can influence the development of the strategy. That point is important. That 2/3 of the respondents think that they can do it as a community, not as an individual, but as a community. So that gives us the authority to keep going in the form of a community-led strategy. Not a council-led strategy, a community-led one. So, having got to that point, we then ask the question, how should the community be involved? Well, these are all the ways. Through surveys, social media, town hall meetings, workshops, submissions, community forums, community expert panels, advisory boards, specialised committees. So again, in one manner or form, most if not all of those approaches will be picked up, not necessarily in the preparation of the strategy, but in its implementation. So don't forget, we're thinking about not just how to come together and prepare this strategy, but more importantly, how the heck are we going to implement it? And this set of issues here, well, techniques, methods, a lot of them deal with implementation. The workshops obviously form part and parcel of the core of the preparation of the strategy. We've already done surveys. We'll do submissions in the next couple of months. So that's what you told us, and I think we can meet that. So the critical considerations are these. You said that all consultation and communication should be handled in a transparent and inclusive manner. And the council, and certainly Griffith, are doing our darnest to meet that requirement. And I think what's happened to date, you'd have to agree that has been the case. You said that engagement activities should be supported by expert knowledge and endorsed meaningfully by council. And again, I think the evidence suggests that, well, the evidence proves that that's been done, and there'll be more expert knowledge put into this process, and we've got the full support of council. You said there should be opportunities for involvement, well advertised, timing should be carefully considered, enable diversity of participants to attend. And I hope most of you, if not all of you, participated in that poll that was just done in the last week or so about when is the most appropriate time for the workshops to commence. And we've taken that information on board and setting out a tentative timetable or draft timetable for the workshops. The diversity of participants, well, I think I've highlighted there the challenges that we see, but you know, we're only academics, we're only researchers, and we're up here in Brisbane and we're not locals. It's going to be up to the locals on the ground to get us that diversity of participants, how to tap into those youth. I mean, we've done a lot of work with Sussex Inlet community in the past, and we did have youth on our working group, but they were sons. We didn't have any daughters, we had sons of some of the working group members. So maybe you could encourage some of your children who fall into that youth category, cohort, to participate. I'm sure that we can rely on you folk to give us a hand to get that diversity covered there. And you said we needed to have appropriate mechanisms in place to manage dominant individuals and personal agendas. And some of you have been in workshops that I've run previously. You know that we have a set of protocols and they are given up front to all participants, and we manage the workshop behaviour according to those protocols. So rest assured, we've got that base covered. And lastly, you said ensure that there's adequate resources allocated for the implementation of such a strategy. Well, that's an ongoing discussion. Councils are involved in this process, so I think those resources for implementation will come naturally, but it's something that we'll be having a very close look at as we progress. So to sum it up, at Griffith here, we find these survey results very encouraging, and they're a testimony that we're dealing with a community that's well engaged, it's enthusiastic about improving their backyard and their capacity to plan, respond and recover from extreme weather events and other disasters. It's clear as crystal. Now, the many detailed responses have also revealed that we're dealing with an experienced community that's got an intrinsic knowledge about the strengths and weaknesses of their backyard and about how Shoalhaven can become more adaptive and resilient in the future. Now, despite the relatively high response rates to the survey, we would acknowledge there's still many voices in the community that haven't yet been heard, and I've discussed that. So I won't labour that point, except to encourage you to help us. This survey is only the first opportunity for community engagement, and it'll be followed by a range of other activities, including webinars, workshops, and so on, that will be facilitated by my team from Griffith University. And the results of this survey, they provided important context to an input for the upcoming workshops, and they will be incorporated into future community-led strategies that we develop. So thank you for that. Happy to take questions, and back to you, Shane.
Good, thank you very much, Daryl. It's I think I'd like to thank Daryl and Pazit from Griffith University for taking the time to help us prepare the survey. It wasn't planned, and it was never originally part of the engagement that Council was planning to do. But due to the COVID situation we had this year and the border restrictions and lockdowns, we saw that it was an opportunistic time to reach out and do some further engagement with our community, and it's really great to have such a positive response to that, and it's really great to see how Daryl's and the team have been able to interpret that data and give us that information back, and you can see how now that can provide a good basis for moving forward with the workshops. So we're currently reviewing that project report for that survey that Daryl and the team have provided, and we're going to put that in a format that can be distributed around to all the participants probably next week, after we've had the chance to pretty that up and produce it for you guys. So moving forward, as Daryl said, we're looking at early next year running the workshops, and we sent out a poll recently to try and engage when is a good starting point for those workshops. And resoundingly, the majority of people have been back in touch with us have said that February is going to be the preferred start date. So if we start any earlier than that, we knew that January was going to be problematic. So at this stage, we're looking at February next year, and Daryl and team are working on a timeline now of workshops that will commence in February and move forward from that date onwards. So as soon as we have those dates firmed up, we'll reach out to you again and let you know when those dates are going to be, so we can get them locked in. And I really look forward to getting involved in those projects and getting face to face with everybody. And as Daryl and Fazita are too, it'll be great to actually get this project underway face to face. So I'm just going to have a look here. We haven't gotten many questions, Daryl, so that's a good. I think that's a good suggestion straight away that you've covered that topic really well. And I think I've just got a suggestion here of engaging schools, engaging with the youth via schools and established youth groups. And I can just let everyone know that that has been done quite extensively, and one via the survey that we're trying to do, but we're also been waiting for the schools to get back face to face and trying to work that in with their curriculum, and having that survey distributed through the school networks and newsletters themselves, so we can get some more engagement with that. And our youth engagement officer at council is actively working with those people across all the high schools locally as well. Okay, just reading some more questions here. It just says it's really great to hear how much interest there is in the community. It's a shame that young people haven't taken part yet. And are there any participants that can help with getting some local youth people involved? Again, that just speaks to what I said previously. Yeah, we are actively engaging. It is quite hard to engage with younger people, especially on topics as complicated as this. But we are trying to do our best to get as much engagement as possible.
Sorry, can I make a comment, Shane?
Please, Daryl.
Am I still? Yeah, I'm still able to be heard.
Yes.
One technique we've run in the past in Shoalhaven, and we would propose to run it again, should the need arise, is for my team to actually go and do some school visits and engage various groups in the schools and try to elicit. I mean, if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, Muhammad goes to the mountain. So that's the approach we'll take, should it be necessary. But by hook or by crook, we're going to get that youth view in here. How we get the 18 to, the 24-year-olds, the younger married couples, I don't know. That's the tricky one, because they're all busy starting families and starting jobs.
Thank you, Daryl. I've just had another one about engaging with the Aboriginal community as well. A 3% survey response rate is quite low, and again, we've tried to put the survey out to as many people as possible, but also by providing the links to the survey with people with people like yourselves, enabled you to forward that around throughout your networks as well. So when you consider that we have had 390 responses to a survey that was very impromptu, it's suggested that the communications plan around that worked quite well, and that networking that you have done yourselves has worked well as well. It is, it is hard to try and get responses from some people in the community, but it's through networks like yourselves that is also achieved. Okay. There's a few more responses about people wanting to make sure that the youth are actively engaged in this process, and And as you've heard, we've tried to address that where we can, and we'll continue to do so until the school year finishes up in the next 4 weeks or so. Okay, well, it looks like we're drawing the questions coming to a close now. So if there is no further questions that people have for the panel, then I'd probably draw this webinar to a close and thank Professor Darryl Lochoy for the work he's put into the survey, and Mayor Amanda Finley for joining us as well. And it's very promising for our workshops as we move forward. We've got a really strong foundation, and really looking forward to getting together next year, as we've talked about. So I thank you all for coming along and attending today. It's really great to see how many people have come along. We've had 33 people in the meeting right now, and it's really encouraging to see people turning out for this. So without further ado, I'll call it a day, and thank you all very much for coming along.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Darryl.